Right, obviously, this ties in as a segue to something we discussed on, I think it was the last episode, right? Which was this premise where no one really knows yet if the playoffs will even go as planned as well, because currently, just as the aforementioned Frederick Brion had to play with their entire academy squad because people tested positive, at the moment, the way it works in LCK is unlike in the LCS, where if someone just tests positive, you know, or in LEC, you put like fucking teddy bears in the chairs and you're all just in a facility. Basically, if you test positive, you're just out of the next match until you then test negative. So
they changed it.
Right, yes. So this was what we were discussing, because obviously the question would be, will they allow them to play remotely for the playoffs? So let's talk about this topic then.
Okay, so I'm going to go on a probably pretty long rant here, guys, because I know I shouldn't be getting triggered by Reddit, but I got mega triggered by Reddit.
That's all Reddit's fault. He's getting triggered. I'm doing triggering. To be fair, they go there to trigger us, so it all works. It's a symbiotic effect.
So what happened was how Reddit triggered me was that there was a thread on the LoL subreddit basically trying to make excuses, uninformed excuses about how LCK couldn't possibly switch to remote play, even though they had done remote play previously. So I have to go through this argument by argument, because a lot of this the thread literally named me as, kind of being reaction into my takes to other personalities' takes. Raz was tweeting about it as well. And then a lot of the comments were like, would Monty say something without knowledge? Of course he would. Ha ha ha. Like as if I was making shit up, when this is an unsourced post that just vomited out a bunch of claims that I can tell you, were untrue. And I don't just make shit up, guys. I know this may blow your mind, but after 5 years of living in Korea, I have a lot of contacts in Korea. I know what the fuck is going on. And here, we're going to prove it. Okay, guys? Wasn't an uninformed take. So, as you can see, wow, they instantly changed it. Weird. It's almost like the claims that KESPA required on-site referees, or that there was some mysterious Korean law that nobody could actually fucking cite, would require this to happen, or that there was some bureaucracy that was causing this from a rules perspective. Okay? First off, how are other regions dealing with remote players and cheating? LCK could literally just ask. They could just ask the other regions and copy those procedures. Like, Riot certainly has ways to prevent cheating remotely if they're actively monitoring the situation, right? Don't think it's that big of a deal, honestly, okay? So the other thing was talking about Korean laws about isolation. Yes, you do have to be isolated. The teams can provide isolation for you. That's not a big deal. You can still play remotely in a room by your fucking self. That is possible, as has been proven. So here you go, guys. Here's what actually happened. And this has to go with the governance and the way that competitive integrity and the way the commissioner of the LCK has been, in my opinion, misbehaving. The league itself, and you can look at this for proof, by the way. So there's two things that corroborate what I'm saying publicly, so that you can go and look. First off, Arnold from Gen G, in the thread on Reddit, said that the KESPA stuff was misinformation and that KESPA was not the reason, and these refs being in the room were not the reason why they couldn't do anything. So we just knocked that one right off from a public statement from a team CEO. Now, Joe Marsh also tweeted a kind of cryptic tweet about the 10 teams in LCK agreeing on something.
This is from T1, if people don't know.
From T1, the CEO of T1. So what happened was that LCK, instead of governing itself, decided that they should have all of the teams unanimously decide to go remote, as opposed to owning their own decision.
So if even one person dissents it doesn't happen. Right.
Correct. And you can see the problem with this, because it affects competitive integrity. If you are a team that is heading into the playoffs, and let's say all of Frederick Brion gets sick, you can veto this in order to make sure your team gets into playoffs. Now, I don't know who was vetoing this. I do not know. So I'm not going to say I do, but I do know that some teams were holding out towards the end, which is why it wasn't changing. Okay. And that's why Joe Marsh made the tweet that he did when it actually happened and all the teams agreed to it. You cannot have this occur because somebody who has the league's and the competition's best interest at heart has to be able to put their foot down and say, no, this is an unfair situation. And we are giving potentially just one team the enormous power to decide how playoffs go potentially, or who gets into playoffs. Okay. So you cannot have this. Like, the commissioner, the phantom commissioner of LCK, should be making a public statement saying this is the decision. It may not be popular with some of the teams, but this is how it has to go, because that's the job of being a commissioner, guys. You have to safeguard the competitive integrity of the league, and someone is always going to get mad. And sometimes the fans are going to get mad, and you just have to own it. That's just your fucking job. Okay? So basically, LCK allowed itself to get hijacked by the teams, which destroyed the competitive integrity of this entire scenario. They also clearly did not have a plan about what happens if COVID cases get too high. Now, to explain what's going on for those of you in Korea, last week, they were hitting peaks of 600,000 new cases a day, which is 0.5% of the Korean population in one day. And they were up to about 2% of the population in a single week testing positive for COVID, because they just got Omicron over there. Now, this was not sudden. This was happening. The caseloads were increasing, and there was no plan.
There's no contingency if they hit a certain amount.
There's no contingency about how this was going to occur, even though Korea could have looked at any other country in the world and said, seemed like, wow, Omicron is really, those cases are, we know what happens in every other country, because they were one of the last ones to get it right now. And there wasn't a plan. So it's another failure on behalf of the teams, and mostly, again, the league, for not even forcing this issue earlier on. Now we're going to get into something else. So you might be wondering, well, why couldn't they delay games? Well, because there are 3 days before playoffs in LCK. Now, there were also 3 days before playoffs last year in the spring split. So this isn't new. We can have argument whether we should have more than 3 days before playoffs. My answer would be yes.
It used to be like at least a week from what I remember back in the day, yeah?
Yeah, it should be probably 2 weeks. I like how LEC has like a 3-week break. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. So that's the argument that was being made. However, here's what nobody is talking about. LCK playoffs are starting a week earlier this year than last year. And the reason why they're starting a week earlier is because last spring split, they started in the same week. And in the second round robin, they went from 5 best of 3s per week to 4. Okay? So it takes an extra week to finish the competition. This year in spring, they kept 5 best of 3s for the entire split to accelerate the schedule by 1 week. Okay, you say to yourself, why would they do that? And if they have an extra week, if MSI is planned at the same dates, I don't think it will be. I think it'll be slightly later, guys, just for, that's an aside. Why would they do that? Why would they accelerate the schedule by a week? Well, this year, there are these things called the Asian Games. And the Asian Games are very, very important to the Korean players, because if they win a gold medal, and they happen once every 4 years, so the last one happened in 2018, if they win a gold medal, they are exempted from their military service. Faker did not win a gold medal last time. The Chinese team won the 2018 Asian Games. And so it's not the Asian Games don't happen until September, guys. What's going to happen is that there are qualifiers for the Asian Games. So the league schedule itself was condensed in order to give players a break and to practice with the Asian Games. Now, keep in mind, there can only be like 5 or 6 players, I think, with a substitute on this roster. And in theory, this roster could contain Korean players who play in the LPL. That's a thing.
Yep, true.
So what you're saying is the games, there is an extra week. They could have delayed to the same schedule in order to, I don't know, not make Fredit Brion play with an entire roster of substitutes, and then curtailed some of the practice time for the Asian Games, because right now, the entirety of the LCK is being condensed for the, not even guarantee, the chance that maybe 6 LCK players can go to the Asian Games, which is a separate tournament, which is, by the way, not in the best interest of the LCK, the league itself. So the competitive integrity of LCK has been sacrificed for a different tournament. And I understand that the players really care about this. And I understand that they don't want to do this military service, right? I get it. But there's no guarantee that they won't do the military service. They didn't win last time. So you might be sacrificing this for 3 Korean players who don't even play in LCK, and maybe they don't even win. And then what? So now we just get fake ass games in LCK as a result of this.
Because I think the thing that might be lost on Western fans is they might think similarly, like you said at the end there, Monty, like this isn't a tournament that's part of like the league world circuit that's, builds into worlds, or it's nothing to do with it at all. It's essentially like the Olympics, but with video games and only among Asian countries. And this is also where if as a Westerner, you're not going to get it. Like this isn't like a Fonzie tournament. Like people might know there was another tournament that tried the national approach. It was actually, by the way, the guys behind PGL, I think, who run it, which is the IESF tournament that's run all the time, where it has like amateurs and semi-pros and they compete under their nationality, right? But the difference is that's just like a side tournament that no one cares about. The Asian countries, Korea especially, care an immense amount about winning tournaments like this. Like even politically, it's a big deal. Like I'll guarantee, by the way, years ago, even though that was the year we all know RNG came up and it was basically just RNG plus like one or two other players or something that won that tournament. Actually, at the time, that will have been really embarrassing for Korea. They'd been champions of league all those years. The first time you're doing sort of an Olympics tournament and China beats you, like that's egg on your face. Like people don't realize those stories aren't made up. When the Koreans do those interviews where they're sort of like, they almost imply that like second place is first loser. Like they just don't give a fuck if you come second. Like that really is baked into their culture. I mean, there's a very famous story people might know. I think it was from the Olympics decades ago. There was a story where I think it was Japanese runners. There was these Japanese runners, Monty, and one of them didn't win. So he committed suicide. Like the reason that's as a Westerner, that's inconceivable is because there was more than one of them. So one of them was never going to win anyway. So you think like, how can this? But that the point is for them, the stakes are incredibly high. What your country is seen to represent, whether you're better, whether you can compete on the world stage. Like essentially, if you're Kesper, the Korean Esports Association, remember, you do really care about this tournament. We don't as fans. Like I care in the sense that if the game was a great game, I'd care. But like as you say, if you ask me, do I want to compromise some of like the quality, the integrity of the games in LCK? Of course not. That goes without saying. I would say no, but sadly, I think this is where politics has a shadow that looms large over esports sometimes.
Yeah, I also think, from what I understand, that this is the first time League of Legends is being like a featured game at the Asian Games. It did exist at previous ones, but I think there's more of a spotlight on it this time. So I do think that there is a push from people within LCK because they think that the game being highlighted with this level of prestige is going to bring in more money and sponsors into the league. Like that could be a reason why you want it. Like it actually does benefit LCK in order to make these scheduling arrangements. But let me bring up a different point here, because let's take a look at the NHL. So if you guys didn't watch the Winter Olympics this year, usually the NHL builds in a break so that NHL players can play in the Olympics. This year, because they had to stop games, because they actually had to shut down the entire league for a few weeks because there were too many cases of COVID, they actually canceled the Olympic break, didn't let any NHL players go to the Winter Olympics, and played NHL games during that time instead. So this is a really similar situation, guys, like basically the identical situation, except the Asian Games isn't even as big as the Olympics. It's number 2 to the Olympics, right? And the league decided that it was in the league's best interest in order to not sacrifice their competitive integrity and their scheduling in order to play those games. But my problem is like, even if you agree that the Asian Games are important, even if the players want to play them, there is nobody at the LCK who appears to be fighting publicly for the competitive integrity of this league. It's anonymous Twitter posts. There's no face behind it. There's no name behind it. It's irresponsible and cowardly. Why is no one at LCK capable of taking a public stand? Because they're afraid of the fans. And it's like, too bad. That's the job. That's it. And meanwhile, what's even more disgusting to me is like in the Faker remake game that we saw, they're releasing the voice comms for the referee and throwing this poor fucking ref under the bus while there's no voice making an official decision. What is this? What the fuck is this? It's embarrassing.
I can't even imagine if you went on those fucking DC Inside or whatever, those forums in Korea. I bet that fucking referee has just been torn apart, Monty. I bet
it's not fair, right?
Now. I know.
It's not fair.
That's brutal.
And we already have a precedent. Like we already have a precedent in the NHL and the Winter Games about what should, in my opinion, happen in this situation. And it's not sacrifice the LCK so that they can have more of a break when they were already playing a condensed schedule, when they're already, like, the league needs to take some level of responsibility for not having these plans in place, for allowing the teams to choose, that is just baffling to me. Like, the whole point of having a commissioner is to be the one who mediates between the teams and who is the neutral pillar of competitive integrity, which has just gone completely out the window. So I'm mad. And I'm mad that people think I'm talking out of my ass when those are the facts, guys. Those are the facts of this issue. And I knew what the facts were. Sometimes I don't want to reveal all the facts, and I have an opinion, and maybe Monty knows more than he's letting on because he doesn't want to leak shit. Because I try and resolve this stuff behind the scenes. And it has been resolved sort of now, right? Like, we can't undo the past damage. At the very least, we're not going to get, hopefully, fraudulent playoffs. And also, for all you guys who are like, won't somebody think of the players, or the players might be forced to play if they have COVID? Show me a sport on Earth where if the doctor and the player says they feel fine, even if they're slightly injured, they're not in the game. Like, they're adults, dude. They don't need you to fucking protect them.
In the UFC, anyone who's seen a UFC title fight knows exactly what I'm talking about. Even if the guy's hair is half hanging off, we all low-key want that doctor and the fighter to go like, no, I'm fine. It's fine. Continue. Like, you can even see he's definitely not okay, but we all want the fight to keep going so that everyone goes out of their way to get the guy back on the field, of course. That's the problem, mate. Unfortunately, these last few years have made people flip the other way, and it's like they've taken the premise of harm reduction and they've gone too far. Because what they haven't asked themselves is, what are you giving up in exchange for the harm reduction? If the answer's everything, well, then we've got nothing left to have we? We've given up everything. Like, that part makes no sense, does it, boys? So the point is, there's always going to be some give and take on this topic. And in this case, by the way, Monty's actually arguing, in theory, for the safer fucking option than they currently do, except obviously they would say by not playing at all. But we're giving you like a compromise between safety and get to play the game and have it be reasonably competitive still. Because as we're saying, like, if you put an entire team out, you may as well just give that a forfeit. There's almost no point playing the game.
Also, what fucking fantasy do you guys live in where every person playing a sport is always at 100%? You never fucking know. Somebody could have a cold. Like, and if somebody had a really severe case of COVID, should they be playing? No. No, they shouldn't. Not. But you can't just be like, if they have COVID, they can't play. Many people don't even have symptoms. So, like, you should let that be the player and the team's decision as to their own abilities. That's it. You can't be that person, so you can't know. And we don't have to just like, oh, protect the poor pro players. Like, they're adults. They can make their own decisions, guys. Come on. If they want to compete, they should compete.
Thing is, though, that is low-key, by the way, one of my number one triggers, which is like, esports is the field that shows that old quote is so right, Monty. You know, like a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. Because whenever some fucking nephew/reply guy gets one piece of info, they just shut down all convo because they think they know fucking everything. So the worst people ever are the ones who like maybe this guy knew a little bit about like Kesper, or he's Googled and gone, oh, actually there's a tournament coming. So then they just think they then have the reason. But the joke is, like, we might even know a person that's more connected than the source you're getting it from, you idiots. And that person might not be able to speak publicly. Maybe Monty, given his take, was actually like someone's come to him and said, oh, you don't know the Korean scene. There's a drama at the moment. People don't. You don't know that, you idiots. Hey, when you see these articles come out, Richard Lewis, all the rest of it, that's why. It's because they've got the fucking source network, boys. They know these people.
Also, guys, who the fuck are you going to trust these days? Everybody in League works for Riot. Like, literally everybody. Like, we're the last free nation of esports over here, holding our own. We're the fucking 300 in the Thermopylae Pass. Like, come on, there's nobody else. That's it.
Do you want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.